Hello and welcome to Odds and Ends number 13. In this episode we'll cover the domestication of Horsegram, Yam Bean, or Ahippa, and Persimmon. You'll start with Horsegram. Horsegram belongs to the species Macrothyma uniform. Horsegram was the chief crop in India, historically speaking, for most of the history of the Southeast Asian area, with every country within the Southeast Asia region using this as a primary crop for protein sources. However, with the passage of time, horsegram has lost favor and has been reduced to a food of the poor, and there's, up to this point, been very little research onto this topic. Using a paper by Dr. Dorian Q. Fuller and Charlie Murphy, the domestication of horsegram in India will be the topic. Utilizing the ancient, pre-modern Indian and Southeast Asian languages, such as Indo-European, Austroasiatic, Munda, and Dravidian, they found a linguistic history for horsegram. All four languages listed have a name for horsegram in their language. In the Dravidian languages, their word for horsegram is kol or kolat, similar to the Indo-European languages such as Sanskrit, which call it kolata, and the Munda / Austroasiatic language calls it koltu, indicating that these language groups are derived from one singular language, and that group of people that spoke that language knew of horsegram and possibly domesticated it. The languages listed, based on linguistics and paleolinguistics, seem to be no older than 1200 BC, and since similar characters were found in the Neolithic pottery, which date back to 3000 BC, the domestication process of horsegram likely started between 3000 BC and 1200 BC. And based on current archaeological evidence, this likely started sometime in the area we now know as Gujarat, due to the great similarity between many languages of today and the past being spoken of within the archaeological evidence within that region, based on pottery characters. This prototypical culture is now referred to as a Proto-Dravidian people, and is likely this group domesticated horsegram. Biological and archaeological evidence also seems to suggest that, yes indeed, horsegram was amongst the first crops domesticated directly in India. Both wild horsegram and wild mung bean can also be found within the regions where both species are hypothesized to be domesticated, further indicating their domestication was in that region. There also seems to be two distinct groups of horsegram, given that, like with mung bean, there are distinct populations of wild horsegram found in the Himalayas and the savanna, and based on recently found archaeological evidence, different domestication trajectories were found in different locations. For instance, in northwestern India, the domestication process began during the Harappan, which began in the year 2600 BC approximately, while another population seems to be domesticated between the year 2000 BC and 1001 BC, indicating two separate domestication events for horsegram, again very similar to mung bean. Now on to the domestication of yam bean. Yam bean, also known as Pachycerus erosus, as well as two other species such as P. ahippa and P. tuberosus, and all three species can crossbreed with each other to produce fertile hybrids. These bean crops, unlike most other bean crops, are not harvested for their pods. Instead, despite being a legume, only the roots are harvested, which are very yam-like in look, and the species has been historic food substances for both Mexicans in ancient times and Southeast Asian people. And to a certain extent, people in Mexico still produce a fair amount of it, with a small area of farmland producing 160 tons per hectare. P. tuberosus and P. erosus are the most often consumed species of yam bean. The tuberosus plants are generally larger than the other two species. In an early study of this crop species, using the chloroplast DNA, it is likely that all three species derive quickly from one common ancestor due to varying climates, domestication, and human selection. Tuberosus species is likely the ancestral species to the Erosus species, although this conclusion was not fully conclusive. Similarly, the Ahippa Yam Bean lacks much of the genetic diversity found in the other two species. As of right now, genetically speaking, the landraces and cultivars still have unclear origin, and there are no clear subgroups related to this geographic origin for the different landraces. For instance, the Central American and Mexican strains were cultivated by the Aztecs and Mayans, but based on current genetic evidence, they came from different locations than their wild relatives, which have great genetic dissimilarities between them. But based on current evidence, the domestication of the tuberosa yam bean happened in the Peruvian Andes, and has been found all throughout South America, including Paraguay and Bolivia. And although most Pachyhyrus species are very diverse genetically, all the tuberosas yam beans were very genetically similar to each other, more so than any other species within that genus. There's also great genetic diversity within Diarosis, the yam bean, likely due to geographic isolation and domestication. And based on genetic analysis, Diarosis yam bean could be divided into 4 broad groups, based entirely on genetic distinction. One is found exclusively in Central America, 2 groups found both in Central America and Mexico, and 1 found only in Mexico. Yam beans are typically primary self-pollinating, but there is some crossbreeding that does happen, between 2 to 4% crossbreeding, depending on how available pollinators are. Now onto persimmon domestication. The common Japanese persimmon, Diosporos kaki, is one of the most ancient trees domesticated in China. The first known mention of this tree was around 450 BC, when the grandson of Confucius, Kongji, wrote his book Li Ji Ne Zi, which I'm definitely mispronouncing the names of, where it's considered a very important crop during the Warring States period between 475 BC and 221 BC. In another book called Lin Fu, written by a guy whose name I can't even pronounce, between 120 and 118 BC, observed that the West Han dynasty also planted quite a few persimmons. It was only enjoyed by the rich few until the South and North Dynasty era, which lasted between 386 AD and 589 AD. The crop became further popularized due to the improvements in grafting and the ability to remove astringency from the fruit, both methods being developed during the Tang and Song dynasties, which lasted between 618 AD and 1279 AD. Many cultivars were being bred. This is likely when the domestication process happened. It was further improved during the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, as well as the time period between 1271 AD and 1963. Sometime between these two time periods, during the intervening periods between then and modern days, the Japanese persimmon was introduced to Japan in the 7th century AD and the 14th century within Korea. It was later introduced to Spain in the 16th century as an ornamental. The information spread to Europe in the 17th century and became widespread throughout many parts of Europe in the 18th century. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to me on BitChute for a greater variety of content, 4 videos a week. And thank you to all my subscribers on both platforms. I appreciate it.